The rain started just after midnight. It was the kind of storm that erased every sound outside. The roads were empty. The sky flashed with distant lightning. Inside a small house at the edge of town, only one room was still awake. An old radio sat on a wooden desk. Its speaker hissed with endless static. Most people would have turned it off. But Daniel never listened to the radio for music. He searched for forgotten frequencies, numbers stations, abandoned emergency channels, strange signals that no one could explain. Every night, he wrote down everything he heard. Most nights there was nothing, just noise, just static. Tonight felt different. The storm seemed to interfere with every frequency. Voices appeared for only a second before disappearing again. Fragments of conversations, broken weather reports, military transmissions that faded before he could understand them. Daniel slowly turned the tuning dial. The speaker crackled. Another burst of static. Then, silence. Not ordinary silence. Complete silence. The radio looked alive. The signal meter suddenly jumped to full strength. Daniel frowned. No station should have been broadcasting there. He checked his notebook. The frequency was empty. It had always been empty. Then the speaker clicked. A weak voice emerged through the noise. "Can anyone hear me?" The sentence repeated. "Can anyone hear me?" The voice sounded frightened, exhausted, as if the speaker had been talking for hours. Daniel quickly reached for his recorder. He pressed the record button. The voice continued. "If you're hearing this, do not come here." The transmission suddenly filled with loud static. Then the voice returned. "They're listening." Another burst of interference. Daniel leaned closer. His heartbeat slowed. He had recorded hundreds of strange signals before. None had ever sounded like this. The speaker breathed heavily. Then came another sentence. "The station isn't abandoned." Lightning exploded outside. The lights inside the room flickered. The radio remained on. Perfectly clear. Daniel checked the signal strength again. Still full. Impossible. No modern station used this frequency. He opened an old government directory. Every licensed broadcast station was listed. Nothing matched. He searched older records. Finally, one name appeared. Blackwood Transmission Station. Closed 38 years ago. Official reason: permanent equipment failure. No replacement, no reopening. Daniel stared at the page. If the station had been abandoned for decades, who was speaking? The voice returned. Much quieter now. "If anyone hears this, please don't repeat my mistake." The transmission ended. Static filled the room once again. Daniel replayed the recording. Every word remained. Nothing had changed. No distortion. No hidden edits. It sounded completely real. He searched online archives until sunrise. Very little information remained. Most newspaper articles had disappeared. The few that survived mentioned strange electrical failures, missing maintenance workers, an investigation that ended without answers. The station had been sealed. No one was allowed inside. Daniel zoomed in on an old photograph. Rusted transmission towers stood above a dark forest. Every window was broken. Every door had been welded shut. The building looked forgotten, yet someone had just broadcast from inside. He compared the weather in the photograph to tonight. Another storm. Almost identical. Coincidence. Or something else. He played the recording one final time. This time, he noticed something he had missed. Very faintly, behind the frightened voice, another sound. Someone whispering. Not one person. Dozens. Layered together beneath the static. Too quiet to understand. Too clear to ignore. Daniel turned off the recorder. The room became silent. Then, without anyone touching it, the radio switched back on by itself. The same frequency returned. Only 4 words came through the speaker. "We're still waiting." Daniel barely slept. The 4 words echoed through his mind. "We're still waiting." He replayed the recording again and again. Each time, the voices beneath the static became easier to hear. Not because the recording changed, because his ears began to recognize them. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, all whispering at once. None of the words were clear. Only one thing was certain. They were not speaking to each other. They were speaking to him. By sunrise, Daniel had made his decision. He needed to find Blackwood Transmission Station. The old maps led him far beyond the last paved road. The forest grew thicker with every mile. Towering pines blocked the sunlight. Even his GPS lost its signal. Only an old paper map remained. Hours later, the trees finally opened. The station stood exactly where the photograph had shown it. Its massive radio towers still pierced the gray sky. Rust covered every steel beam. Broken cables swayed in the wind. The place looked untouched for decades, yet something felt wrong. The warning lights at the top of one tower blinked, slowly. Red, dark, red, dark. There should have been no electricity. Daniel parked his truck beside a rusted gate. A faded sign still hung from twisted chains. Keep out. Federal property. The letters had nearly disappeared beneath moss. The main entrance was sealed with thick steel plates. Heavy welds covered every edge. No one had entered through that door in years. He walked around the building. Most windows were shattered. Nature had reclaimed the walls. Vines climbed over cracked concrete. Then he noticed something strange. Fresh footprints. Only one set, leading toward a broken maintenance entrance. The mud was still wet. Someone had been here recently. Daniel followed them. The old service door hung slightly open. The lock had been forced. He stepped inside. The air smelled of rust. Dust floated through narrow beams of light. Every room looked frozen in time. Old desks, broken computers, stacks of faded documents. Nothing had been moved, except the footprints. They continued deeper inside. The silence felt unnatural. Even the wind had disappeared. No birds, no insects, nothing. Daniel entered the main control room. A giant wall of radio equipment stretched across the room. Thousands of switches, hundreds of glowing meters. Everything should have been dead. Instead, one tiny green light blinked. He walked closer. It was impossible. The machine had power. He placed his hand against the metal. It felt warm, as though someone had been using it moments earlier. A sudden click echoed behind him. He spun around. Nothing. Only darkness. Then another sound. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Above him. Someone was walking on the second floor. Daniel called out, "Hello?" No answer. The footsteps stopped. Complete silence returned. He climbed the old staircase. Each step groaned beneath his weight. The second floor contained offices. Most doors hung open. Every room was empty, except one. The last office remained locked from the inside. Daniel pushed. Nothing. He looked through the cracked glass. A desk, a chair, a coffee cup. Everything covered in dust, except the chair. It rocked gently, back and forth, as if someone had stood up only seconds earlier. Then it stopped. Daniel forced the door open. The room was empty. No windows were open, no hidden exits. Only silence. On the desk lay an old newspaper. Its headline caught his attention. "Third technician disappears." He turned the page. The article described workers hearing voices through the station's equipment. Most dismissed them as electrical interference. 3 engineers vanished within 6 months. No bodies were ever found. The station closed shortly afterward. Daniel folded the newspaper and slipped it into his backpack. Suddenly, a loud burst of static exploded downstairs. The sound echoed through every hallway. He rushed back toward the control room. The radio equipment had come alive. Lights flashed across dozens of panels. Meters slammed to their maximum limits. Speakers crackled. Then every machine fell silent. Only one old receiver remained active. Its speaker hissed softly. Daniel approached. Without warning, the receiver switched itself on. The same frightened voice returned. Clearer than before. "You shouldn't have come." Daniel froze. The voice continued. "They know you're here now." The transmission cut off. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then every radio in the control room turned toward the exact same frequency. One by one, without anyone touching them. Dozens of speakers activated together. Every single one whispered the same sentence. "Don't let it hear you." Every radio fell silent. The room became still once again. Daniel stood frozen. The sentence lingered in his mind. "Don't let it hear you." He looked around the control room. No one was there. Yet every receiver had spoken at the same time. He forced himself to breathe. There had to be an explanation. A hidden power source. An automated system. Someone playing a cruel joke. He refused to believe anything else. Daniel searched every desk. Most drawers contained nothing but faded manuals and rusted tools. Then he found a locked metal cabinet. Its door had almost rusted shut. After several hard pulls, it finally opened. Inside were dozens of magnetic tape reels. Each one carried a handwritten label. 1974, 1975, 1976, 1977, 1978. The dates stopped abruptly. The final reel had no label at all. Daniel found an old reel-to-reel recorder beneath the cabinet. Surprisingly, it still worked. He connected it to a portable battery pack from his backpack. The machine groaned to life. He inserted the oldest tape. A man's voice filled the room. "This is engineer Robert Hayes. I've started recording everything." The interference returned at exactly 2:13 this morning. "We've checked every transmitter. There is no source." A burst of static interrupted him. Then another voice appeared. Not the engineer. A frightened woman. "Can anyone hear me?" The recording stopped. Daniel stared at the machine. The woman's voice was identical to the one he had heard the previous night. He loaded the second tape. This recording came from 5 years later. A different speaker, a younger man. "We sealed the eastern tower today. The voices are stronger now. They don't come from outside. They come through the equipment itself." Static. Then the same frightened woman. "Please don't come here." The tape ended. Daniel's hands tightened. He inserted another reel. This one came from 1983. A security guard spoke first. "We searched the station. No intruders. No illegal broadcasts. But every midnight, the signal returns." Again, static. Again, the same woman's voice. Exactly the same. Not older, not younger. Exactly the same recording. Daniel continued listening. Tape after tape. Different years, different people, different occupations, different investigations. But every recording ended the same way. The frightened woman always appeared, always speaking the same warning. It was impossible. The voice had remained unchanged for decades. Then Daniel reached the unlabeled tape. He hesitated. Something about it felt different. There was no date, no name, only a black marker line across the reel. He pressed play. At first, nothing. Only silence. Then breathing. Slow. Uneven. A man whispered, "If you're listening, destroy this tape." I waited too long. The signal learned my voice. Daniel frowned. And he had never heard this speaker before. The man continued. "It copies everyone. It remembers everyone. It never forgets." A loud metallic bang echoed through the recording. The man gasped. "No! It's here!" Heavy footsteps approached in the background. Slow, deliberate, closer, closer. Then the man screamed. The tape suddenly stopped. Daniel rewound it. The final seconds played again. This time he noticed something hidden beneath the scream. A second voice. Very quiet. Repeating every word the man spoke. Half a second later, like an echo. Only, it wasn't an echo. The second voice spoke before the first one finished, as though it already knew what he was about to say. Daniel's skin turned cold. He ejected the tape. A folded sheet of paper slipped from inside the reel. It was brittle with age. Across the top, someone had written in large block letters, "The signal does not transmit sound." Below it, another sentence, written in shaking handwriting, "It transmits people." Daniel read it twice. His heart began racing. Just then, the old receiver on the control desk clicked. Static filled the room. A familiar voice emerged. Not the frightened woman, not one of the engineers. His own voice. Calm, clear, and impossible. "Daniel, if you're hearing this, leave now." Before he could react, the transmission continued. "I didn't." Daniel's blood ran cold. He stared at the receiver. The voice had been his. Not similar, not close. His. Every pause, every breath, every word. He replayed the recording. The same message echoed through the room. "Daniel, if you're hearing this, leave now." "I didn't." The transmission ended with a sharp burst of static. Silence returned. Daniel stepped away from the receiver. His mind searched for a logical explanation. Someone had copied his voice. Artificial intelligence. Old recordings. Anything. But there was one problem. He had never spoken those words. He searched the control room again. Behind a row of rusted cabinets, he noticed a narrow metal door. It was almost invisible beneath peeling paint. Unlike every other door in the building, it was unlocked. Inside was a cramped office. Dust covered everything, except one desk. Someone had cleaned it years ago. A faded nameplate still rested on the corner. Chief Engineer, Arthur Voss. Daniel recognized the name. It appeared in every newspaper article. Arthur Voss had been the last engineer assigned to Blackwood Station. He disappeared the night the station was shut down. No body was ever found. The police believed he had fled. Others believed he had died inside the building. Neither theory had ever been proven. Daniel opened the desk drawers. Most contained technical manuals and maintenance reports. The bottom drawer refused to move. He pulled harder. The rotten wood cracked. A false panel fell onto the floor. Beneath it lay a small leather journal. The cover was stained with oil and ash. Inside, every page was filled with Arthur's handwriting. The first entries were calm. Routine equipment inspections, power readings, weather reports. Then the writing began to change. The sentences grew shorter, more frantic. One page read, "The signal isn't coming from another station." Another page, "We've checked every transmitter within 1,000 miles. Nothing is sending it." Several pages later, "We're asking the wrong question. Not where, when." Daniel frowned. He turned the page. Arthur had drawn dozens of clocks. Every clock showed a different year. Arrows connected them like a tangled web. At the center was one word, Blackwood. The next entry was barely readable. The broadcasts aren't traveling across distance. They're traveling across time. Daniel closed the journal for a moment. The idea sounded impossible, yet nothing about Blackwood made sense anymore. He continued reading. Arthur described hearing voices from people who had not yet arrived. Some warned him to leave. Others begged him to destroy the equipment. He ignored them. He believed he could understand the phenomenon. Instead, the voices began answering questions before he asked them. They finished his sentences. They predicted every decision he made. Arthur wrote, "It always knows my next thought. It hears me before I think." The final pages were chaotic. Entire paragraphs had been scratched out. Some words were written over and over. "Don't answer. Don't answer. Don't answer." Then one final entry remained. Unlike the others, it was written neatly, almost peacefully. "If someone finds this journal, you still have time. Do not activate the primary transmitter. The signal wants a witness. Once it learns your voice, it will never stop speaking as you." The final sentence ended halfway across the page. The pen had dragged violently downward, as though Arthur had been pulled away before he could finish. Daniel slowly closed the journal. A metallic clang echoed somewhere below. He rushed back into the hallway. Nothing. Only darkness. Then, the station's public address speakers crackled to life. A voice echoed through every corridor. "Arthur Voss." There was a pause. Then another voice answered. "I'm here." Daniel's heart pounded. The second voice belonged to Arthur, exactly as he would have sounded decades ago. The speakers fell silent. A few seconds later, footsteps echoed from the lower level. Slow, measured, one step at a time. Daniel looked over the railing. A man wearing an old engineer's uniform was walking through the control room below. His back faced the staircase. His movements were stiff. "Unnatural." Daniel called out, "Arthur!" The figure stopped, very slowly. It turned its head. Its face was hidden by darkness. Then every light in the station went out. Only the sound remained. One final sentence drifted through the darkness. "It finally knows your name." Darkness swallowed the station. For several seconds, Daniel could see nothing, only the sound of his own breathing. Then, a tiny light appeared, his portable flashlight. It had switched on by itself. The narrow beam cut through the darkness. The control room below was empty. The engineer was gone. No footsteps. No doors closing. Nothing. Daniel hurried downstairs. Every radio was dead again. The control panels were cold. It was as if the station had never awakened. He grabbed Arthur Voss's journal and rushed outside. The forest felt strangely quiet. Even the storm had passed. His truck started on the first try. He drove away without looking back. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. Then, the car radio turned on by itself. Static. Daniel switched it off. A second later, it turned itself back on. The frightened voice returned. "If you're hearing this, don't go home." Daniel yanked the radio's fuse from the dashboard. The speakers went silent. He sighed. Then the voice came from the passenger seat. Not from a radio, from a small battery-powered receiver inside his backpack. He had never switched it on. It hissed with static. Then the same warning repeated. He removed its batteries. The display went dark. The voice continued anyway. Daniel slammed it onto the floor. Silence. Only for a moment. His phone vibrated. There was no caller ID. He answered. Nothing. Only static. Then, his own voice. "You're taking it with you." The call ended. His phone battery instantly dropped to 0. Daniel pulled into the first gas station he could find. The bright lights made him feel safe. Inside, a cashier greeted him with a tired smile. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Daniel forced a laugh. "I've had a long day." The cashier nodded, then suddenly looked toward the small radio behind the counter. Static filled the shop. The cashier frowned. "Weird. We don't even use that thing anymore." The speaker clicked. Everyone inside the store froze. The frightened woman's voice echoed through the building. "Leave. Right now." The cashier stared at Daniel. "Is that your radio?" Daniel slowly backed toward the door. Before he reached it, every electronic device inside the store activated. Televisions, security monitors, cash registers, portable speakers, all at once. Static roared through the room. Then hundreds of voices whispered together. "We found him." The lights exploded. Glass shattered. Every screen went black. Daniel ran. He jumped into his truck and sped onto the highway. His hands trembled against the steering wheel. The station was miles behind him, but the signal had followed. Night fell before he reached home. He locked every door, closed every window, disconnected every electronic device. No television, no internet, no power. He even shut off the main breaker. The house became completely dark, completely silent. Daniel sat in the living room, waiting. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Maybe it was finally over. Then, a child's toy radio on a dusty shelf clicked. It had not worked in years. Its batteries had been removed long ago. Static filled the room. The tiny speaker crackled. Then Arthur Voss's voice spoke. "You can't escape it. It isn't inside the station anymore. It never was." The toy radio fell silent. A soft tapping came from the front door. 3 slow knocks. Daniel didn't move. Another 3 knocks. Then a voice. Calm. Almost friendly. "Daniel, I know you're awake." It was his own voice, coming from outside. He looked through the peephole. A man stood on the porch, same height, same jacket, same face. The figure smiled, then raised one finger to its lips, and whispered through the closed door, "Don't let it hear us." Daniel didn't open the door. He couldn't move. The figure outside looked exactly like him. Every detail was perfect. The same eyes, the same scar above his left eyebrow, even the same nervous smile. The only difference, its expression never changed. It simply stood there, waiting. The porch light flickered once. When the light returned, the figure was gone. Daniel threw the door open. The street was empty. No footsteps, no parked cars, no shadows disappearing into the night. Only silence. Then his phone vibrated. The battery had been dead for hours. The screen lit up by itself. One new message appeared. "You left too early." No sender. No number. The message disappeared before he could save it. Daniel looked at Arthur Voss's journal. One page he hadn't noticed before had folded itself open. Across the center, Arthur had drawn a rough floor plan of Blackwood Station. A single room was circled in red. It wasn't on any official blueprint. Beside it, Arthur had written, "The room behind the wall." Below that, one final instruction. "If it follows you, go back." Daniel wanted to burn the journal. Burn the tapes. Forget everything. Instead, he drove back to Blackwood before sunrise. The station looked exactly as he had left it. Dark, silent, abandoned. But this time, the main entrance stood open. The heavy steel plates that had sealed it for decades were gone, as if they had never existed. Daniel stepped inside. The control room was empty. Every radio had vanished. Only deep scratches remained where the equipment once stood. He checked Arthur's map. According to the drawing, there should have been a concrete wall behind the main transmitter panel. He pushed against it. Nothing. He searched for several minutes. Then his flashlight caught something unusual. Fresh fingerprints in the dust. Someone had recently touched one section of the wall. Daniel pressed there. A deep metallic click echoed through the room. The wall slowly slid open. Cold air rushed out. A narrow staircase descended into darkness. The smell was different. Not mold, not rust. Burned metal. He walked down carefully. The staircase ended inside a massive underground chamber. It was far larger than the building above. No windows, no exits. Only one enormous machine. Copper coils stretched across the ceiling. Thousands of cables disappeared into the walls. Circular antennas surrounded a raised metal platform in the center. The machine looked unfinished, yet somehow, it was humming. Daniel walked closer. Every cable vibrated gently. Tiny sparks danced across cracked insulators. Power. Somehow, The machine still had power. The walls were covered with handwritten notes, thousands of them, different handwriting, different ink, different languages. But every message carried the same warning. Do not complete the circuit. It is listening. We never left. Daniel's flashlight moved across another wall. Photographs. Hundreds of photographs. Every missing engineer, every investigator, every police officer assigned to Blackwood, even newspaper reporters. Each picture had one thing written beneath it. Heard the signal. At the end of the wall, Daniel found one final photograph, his own, taken only 2 days earlier, outside his house. He had never seen anyone there. Someone had been watching him long before the first broadcast. His hands shook. Then, the giant machine suddenly came alive. A deep vibration rolled through the chamber. Lights flashed one after another. Blue, red, white. The humming became a roar. Every antenna slowly turned toward the center platform. A voice echoed through the room. Not from a speaker, from everywhere. Connection restored. The floor trembled. The air shimmered like heat rising from asphalt. For a brief second, Daniel saw another version of the chamber. New, clean, filled with scientists in white coats. They moved around him as if he weren't there. One of them looked directly into his eyes and whispered, "You're early." The vision vanished. The abandoned chamber returned. The machine continued humming. Then one final switch flipped by itself. A hidden door opened on the far side of the room. Inside, someone was sitting in a chair, facing away from him. Slowly, the chair began to turn. The chair completed its turn. Daniel stopped breathing. The man sitting in it was older. His hair was streaked with gray. Deep lines marked his face. His clothes were torn and stained with ash, but there was no doubt he was looking at himself. The older Daniel smiled sadly. "I was hoping you would wait longer." Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The underground chamber hummed around them. Finally, Daniel whispered, "Who are you?" The older man answered quietly, "You already know." Daniel shook his head. "No." The man sighed, "You will." He slowly stood. Every movement suggested exhaustion. Not from hours, from years. He picked up an old handheld radio from the table beside him. Its antenna was bent, its casing was cracked. This is where all the broadcasts come from. Daniel stared at the radio. The station? The older man shook his head. "No. Me." Daniel frowned. "I don't understand." "You will." The older Daniel looked toward the giant machine. "It doesn't send voices. It sends moments. It takes a single second and repeats it forever." Daniel remembered Arthur's journal. The broadcasts were never traveling across distance. They were traveling across time. So, the frightened woman, she was real. The engineers, they were real. The voices on the tapes, they all happened. The older Daniel nodded. They're trapped inside the signal. He looked down at the radio in his hands. Every transmission is someone trying to escape. Daniel's heart raced. What is this machine? The answer came immediately. A bridge. Not between places, between different versions of the same moment. The humming grew louder. Tiny sparks leaped across the copper coils overhead. The older Daniel glanced upward. "We're running out of time." Daniel stepped closer. "If you know all this, why haven't you destroyed it?" The older man's expression changed. "I tried. I've tried hundreds of times." Daniel stared at him. "Hundreds?" The older Daniel laughed without humor. "Every time I destroy the machine, I become the warning. The signal sends me backward. I remember everything, but no matter what I change, you always come back." Daniel felt the room spinning. "So every message, every warning, they were all from you?" "Not all." The older Daniel looked toward the darkness beyond the chamber. "There are others now. People who arrived after me. They're still trying." A distant whisper echoed through the room. Then another. Then dozens more. The same voices Daniel had heard beneath the static. Not ghosts, not echoes, people calling through overlapping moments in time. The older Daniel's face became serious. "Listen carefully. This is the only version where you've reached this room before activation. You still have one choice." He pointed toward a large metal lever beside the machine. "If that lever reaches full power, the bridge stabilizes. Anyone connected to the signal becomes part of it forever." Daniel looked at the lever. It had already begun moving by itself, slowly, almost silently. "What happens if I stop it?" The older Daniel hesitated. "You save everyone. And you?" The older man smiled. "I disappear." The whispers suddenly stopped. An unnatural silence filled the chamber. Every light turned white. The radio in the older Daniel's hand crackled. A new voice emerged. Cold. Calm. Unlike any Daniel had heard before. You've misunderstood. Both men froze. The voice continued. I never trapped anyone. I only preserved them. The machine roared. The walls vibrated. The air around the platform twisted like rippling water. Figures began appearing inside the light. Arthur Voss, the frightened woman, the missing engineers, every face Daniel had seen in the photographs. They stood silently around the machine, watching him. Then, one by one, they all turned toward Daniel and spoke in perfect unison. Pull the lever. Very voice fell silent. The chamber became unnaturally still. Daniel stared at the lever. The figures surrounding the machine never moved. They only watched. Arthur Voss stood closest. His face showed no fear, no anger, only quiet expectation. The frightened woman slowly stepped forward. For the first time, Daniel could see her clearly. She was wearing the uniform of a radio operator. A cracked identification badge still hung from her jacket. She looked at Daniel, then quietly said, I never asked for help. I asked for someone to end it. Before Daniel could answer, the cold voice returned. It came from everywhere at once. You believe they are prisoners. They are not. They chose to remain. The machine's humming grew louder. The copper coils overhead began spinning. Blue arcs of electricity raced across the ceiling. The older Daniel shook his head. Don't listen. It always lies. The voice answered immediately. And yet, it is using your voice. The older Daniel fell silent. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Daniel realized something terrifying. Every warning he had trusted had come from people already inside the signal. Could they be trusted? Or had the signal been speaking through them all along? The lever moved another inch. A loud metallic lock clicked. Only one position remained. Full power. The chamber suddenly changed. The walls dissolved into static. Daniel was no longer underground. He stood inside the control room. Brand new. Bright lights. Fresh paint. Technicians hurried between radio consoles. Nobody reacted to him. He wasn't there. A calendar hung on the wall. October 14th, 1988. Arthur Voss stood at the primary transmitter. Younger. Alive. He looked toward an engineer. Start the test. The engineer hesitated. We're receiving a signal first. Arthur frowned. From where? No location. No call sign. The receiver crackled. A familiar voice echoed across the room. Arthur, don't activate it. Arthur froze. Daniel's heart stopped. It was his own voice. His future voice. Arthur slowly looked toward the empty room. Exactly where Daniel was standing. For one impossible second, their eyes met. Arthur whispered, So, it's true. The vision shattered. The underground chamber returned. Daniel stumbled backward. The older Daniel caught him. Now you understand. The first warning. It came from us. It always came from us. The lever moved again. One final click echoed through the chamber. Every light turned brilliant white. The machine had reached maximum charge. The older Daniel grabbed Daniel's shoulders. Whatever happens, don't let it finish. Daniel ran toward the lever. The figures surrounding the machine didn't stop him. They simply watched. The cold voice spoke one last time. If you destroy the bridge, you erase every soul inside it. If you complete it, they continue to exist. The frightened woman closed her eyes. Arthur Voss lowered his head. Neither of them said a word. The choice belonged to Daniel alone. He reached the lever, wrapped both hands around it, and pulled with every ounce of strength. For one endless second, nothing happened. Then the chamber exploded with blinding static. Every voice screamed at once. The machine tore itself apart. Copper coils snapped. Glass burst outward. The radio towers above groaned like thunder. The underground floor collapsed beneath Daniel's feet. As darkness swallowed him, one final transmission echoed through the static. Not from the machine, not from the older Daniel, from somewhere far away, from someone who had not yet heard the signal. Can anyone hear me? Daniel opened his eyes. Everything was quiet. No humming, no static, no whispers. Only the sound of wind moving through broken concrete. He was lying inside the ruins of Blackwood Station. Morning sunlight streamed through a collapsed ceiling. The underground chamber was gone. There was no staircase, no machine, only cracked foundations buried beneath decades of dust. Daniel slowly stood. His body ached. His clothes were covered in ash. He looked around for Arthur Voss, for the frightened woman, for the older version of himself. There was no one. The station was empty, completely empty. Hours later, emergency vehicles surrounded the property. A passing hiker had seen smoke rising from the forest. Firefighters searched every room. Police documented every inch of the building. One officer approached Daniel. "You were lucky." "Lucky? The roof collapsed. You could have been killed." Daniel looked toward the center of the station. There was another level. The officer frowned. "There isn't. There never was." Daniel led them to the place where the hidden staircase had been. Only solid concrete remained. No doorway, no tunnel, nothing. Search crews brought in ground-penetrating equipment. They found no underground structure. It was as if the chamber had never existed. Later that afternoon, investigators collected every object they could find. Arthur Voss's journal was missing. The magnetic tapes, gone. The old reel-to-reel recorder, gone. Even the radio receiver that had spoken to Daniel had disappeared. Only one object remained in the evidence box. A burned handheld radio. Its antenna was melted. Its speaker was cracked. The officer examined it. "It doesn't work." Daniel knew better. He didn't argue. Weeks passed. Experts released their final report. The fire had been caused by old electrical wiring. No evidence of illegal transmissions. No unexplained technology. No hidden laboratory. No signs that anyone had occupied the station for decades. Case closed. Newspapers called it an urban legend. Blackwood Station was demolished a month later. Its radio towers were cut down. The forest slowly reclaimed the land. Daniel tried to move on. He stopped listening to late-night broadcasts. He packed away every radio he owned. He never spoke publicly about Blackwood. No one would have believed him anyway. Some nights, he almost convinced himself it had all been a hallucination, until the dreams began. Always the same dream. He stood inside the underground chamber. The machine was whole again. The voices whispered around him. Someone always reached out from the static. Just before he woke, they whispered the same sentence. "We're almost free." One rainy evening, nearly 6 months later, Daniel unlocked a storage box in his attic. Inside were old notebooks from years of radio collecting. He planned to throw them away. As he lifted the final notebook, a small cassette fell onto the floor. He froze. He had never seen it before. There was no label, no date, only 4 words written in faded black ink. "Play when silent." Daniel stared at it for a long time. He didn't own a cassette player anymore. He carried the tape outside, dropped it into a metal trash barrel, and set it on fire. The plastic melted. The tape curled into black ash. Daniel watched until nothing remained. Satisfied, he went back inside. That night, at exactly 2:13 a.m., his bedroom filled with the faint sound of static. There were no radios, no televisions, no phones, only darkness. Then, from somewhere inside the walls, a familiar voice quietly whispered, "You missed one." 1 year later, Blackwood Station no longer existed. The towers had been demolished. The buildings had been erased, the forest had reclaimed everything. To the outside world, the story was finished. Daniel disappeared from public life. He sold his house, closed his bank accounts, stopped answering every message. Friends searched for him. Police opened a missing person report. Nothing was ever found. Eventually, the investigation ended. Daniel became another unsolved disappearance. Months later, hundreds of miles away, a young radio hobbyist named Ethan sat alone in his apartment. Like Daniel once had, he enjoyed searching forgotten frequencies late at night. Most channels carried nothing but static. Weather reports, emergency services, old aviation traffic, nothing unusual. Then, at exactly 2:13 a.m., the signal meter suddenly climbed to its maximum. Ethan frowned. No station should be here. He slowly adjusted the tuning dial. The static disappeared. A man's frightened voice replaced it. "If anyone can hear this, please listen carefully." Ethan reached for his recorder. The voice continued. "My name is Daniel. I don't know how much time I have. I thought destroying the machine would end this. I was wrong." Static swallowed the transmission. A moment later, Daniel's voice returned. "There was never one machine. There was never one station. The signal builds a bridge, wherever someone listens." It only needed Blackwood to begin. Ethan's hands began shaking. Daniel spoke faster now. "If you're hearing me, You've already become part of it. Don't try to find the source. There isn't one anymore. The transmission crackled violently. Dozens of familiar whispers echoed beneath the static. Arthur Voss, the frightened radio operator, the missing engineers, and countless others. Their voices overlapped into one impossible chorus. Then, every whisper stopped. Daniel spoke one final time. I understand now. We were never trapped inside the signal. We became the signal. The radio emitted one long burst of static. Silence followed. Ethan sat motionless. He replayed the recording. The message was gone. Only static remained. He checked his digital recorder. Empty. No file had been saved. He looked at the wall clock. 2:14 a.m. Exactly 1 minute had passed. His phone vibrated. One new notification appeared. There was no sender, no number, only an attached audio file. Its title read, Forgotten Strawdio 1. Ethan hesitated, then pressed play. Nothing, only silence. He was about to delete it when he heard breathing, very faint, then a whisper. Not Daniel, not Arthur, his own voice, calm, almost emotionless. You found us. The phone screen suddenly turned black. Every electronic device in the apartment switched on at once. The television, the laptop, the smart speaker, the microwave display, even an old battery-powered radio sealed inside a cardboard box. Every screen showed the same words. Listener connected. The lights flickered. Static filled the room. Somewhere, far beyond the apartment, far beyond the forest, a frequency that should never have existed, came alive once more. Still waiting, still listening, still searching for the next voice. Because some mysteries are never buried. They simply fade into the background until someone hears them again.